So, what is the connection between the 1983 movie Krull and the Rainbow Bright movie Rainbow Bright and the Star Stealer? Magic ponies. So my daughter really likes to watch cartoons after she gets home from preschool, and I try to pick good shows that won't rot her brain, you know, Sesame Street, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, The Magic School Bus, you know, the usual progressive liberal brainwashing fodder. But recently she's become obsessed with She-Ra, which is odd. I remember it being passable in the 80s, not exactly the type of thing you would think would stand the test of time. So I sat down with her to see what all the fuss was about.
For the honor of Grayskull!
Oh my god, I love She-Ra. I have to admit, there's just something legitimately cool about this crap show that was made exclusively to sell toys. She-Ra is He-Man's sister. Real name Adora, she starts off her own series as a villain. She believes that the evil baddies are actually good and beloved by the people of Etheria. This is because she's never been outside the Fright Zone and is completely brainwashed by the evil Hordak and Shadow Weaver, who she believes are her real parents. He-Man tells her to leave the Fright Zone and see for herself what the Horde is doing to the people of Etheria. Maybe I will, He-Man. Maybe I fucking will. And when she does, she's horrified at what she sees. She then joins a small rebellion in the forest and spends the rest of the series fighting Hordak and his minions. And this is just surprisingly interesting for a show that's essentially Barbies smashing into each other for 22 minutes. The show does have its flaws. Obviously the animation, each episode has one of those 1980s morals at the end, and of course the cast is just let's just say it's not diverse. But I'm transfixed by this show, and then I realize that it's not really She-Ra. It's that She-Ra itself hits the sweet spot in fantasy that you just don't see a lot anymore. So I decided to seek out more retro science fantasy in order to sate my desire for the genre, and okay, there's just a few things. I just have a few notes. On my hunt, I found this book, Space Viking, by H. Beam Piper. And I mean, who could say no to a cover like that? It's exactly what you would imagine. There's a baron on a distant planet in a federation of sword worlds, and he's marrying his true love, and she's super cool and into him, and it sets up this pretty interesting history for this federation of planets. And then she dies on page 24 at her own wedding, murdered by a jealous incel. I want to continue this book, but I also really want my space princess back. God damn it. Why can't this book written in 1964 give me what I want now? What the hell is this genre anyway? Just a bunch of chainmail bikinis and shitlords in space?
Universe of sexual fantasies. My whips.
Science fantasy. This term is pretty broad and can encompass a lot of media. It basically means stories that combine elements of science fiction and fantasy or supernatural elements. And there's a lot of different science fantasy subgenres like post-apocalyptic or dying Earth, which is probably my least favorite, especially right now. You don't got enough fantasy in your science there. But my love for She-Ra falls squarely in the category of sword and planet. The requirements of this genre are on Wikipedia if you want to find those, because this video isn't about making any science fantasy. This is about making the best science fantasy. So here, in no particular order, is my list of what you need to make an awesome science fantasy. Futuristic tech. Science fantasy without lasers is just, well, it's just cookies without milk. It's just sad. Why would you do such a thing? Lasers are important, and so is neon, by the way. Fantasy tends to be very earth-toned. Everywhere tends to look vaguely like England, and it's not bad, it just leaves a lot to be desired. This is why I love Thor Ragnarok so much. Something taken from Norse mythology could easily skew too much into fantasy, and that means dull colors and statues of burly men and all the stuff that makes men feel comfortable in their masculinity. Why did I say that out loud? But it wasn't. It was extremely colorful, and I like colorful. And yes, I am a giant baby who likey-see rainbow colors. All I'm saying is that fantasy can be kind of restrictive at times. There's just so many other stories that we can be telling here. Ones that involve lasers. Fantasy aesthetic combined with futuristic values. Okay, so this is a problem I have with a lot of science fiction. Now, I'll be the first to fight you on why TNG is the best iteration of Star Trek, but I mean, look at this dress. God, so much teal. Everything is straight lines or dystopian sadness or just white. It's boring. Now, in contrast, stay with me here. Despite Star Wars episodes 1 through 3 being some of the most disappointing films ever produced, I do have to give credit where credit is due. Like, this is good, and this is good, and this, and this. I like all of this. Someone worked really hard on it, and I respect that. I like pretty dresses, and ruffles, and lace, and extremely femmy nonsense. And if someone is going to be a princess, I would like them to look like one. Unfortunately, being a product of a lot of older literature like King Arthur and Camelot, Sword and Planet isn't exactly great about representation, and it largely focuses on men and white people. So I say, take the aesthetic and leave the traditional gender roles behind. We don't need them. And I know this may be confusing for some, but when in doubt, don't mess with the dress. Ridiculous names said with extreme sincerity. I was already really enjoying She-Ra when I realized that one of Hordak's minions was actually named Mantenna.
3 capture bots! Only 3 capture bots left? And no captured unicorns to show for it?
It was She-Ra's fault.
I see. It's She-Ra's fault that you're a fool?
Oh, yes. No. It's my fault. No.
It's perfect. Oh. Glimmer, Peekaboo, Madame Raz, Sprocker, and a sorceress literally named Castaspella. This is a running theme I see in all my favorite science fantasy, a complete irreverent disregard for what is and is not a name. It makes me think of playing princesses as a kid and fighting over who got to have fire powers because princesses are magic, that's a fact. And there was always someone whose name was super weird and you still had to say it because everyone agreed to be in character. No! Stay away from the lava rocks, Starman Morelia! Sincerity is also really important. At some point in the 2000s, media seems to have gotten really insecure, and suddenly everyone was smirking into the camera and incapable of taking anything seriously. Not that I would know anything about that, but I feel like it's had a detrimental effect on not just media, but culture. Everything is stupid, everyone is an asshole, caring about things is for babies, and just, God, shut up. It's like TV's been trapped in the 9th grade for 10 years. Irony is over. We're moving on. So the flaws in fantasy alone is that it's mostly based in European history, which is restrictive and boring for women. It's restrictive in the time frame. It's restrictive in technology and social class and race, and there's no lasers. And the flaws in science fiction is that there's no fluffy dresses, dragons, or magic ponies. You now see my obvious crisis. So why, when we combine these two genres together, is the result so often
Harry? Can I sleep with you?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. Lesson 1 of 74. What is patriarchy? I'm just kidding. She-Ra is actually an outlier in most popular Sword and Planet stories. The cast is mostly women, and it has a lot to say about empathy and justice. So in a completely financially driven, self-serving attempt to sell toys to little girls, Mattel accidentally made a show that was fairly progressive for the 80s. So we know why the genre has been so plagued with lameness. The question is, where do we go from here? Well, hopefully toward a lot more gay people. That sounded weird. What I mean is toward a more larger variety of voices, because I don't just mean white and straight authors shoehorning in different types of people to meet some sort of acceptable quota. What would be best is if we had more diverse people writing the stories in the first place. All right, so what do we have so far? A good Sword and Planet fantasy needs swords, fluffy dresses, obviously, lasers, a variety of peoples, and ridiculous names said with intense sincerity. Oh, and neon. It's very important, neon. Bonus points if you have the following: dragons, a big spaceship, witches, magic ponies, portals, a shiny thing that needs getting, giant spiders, interdimensional travel, space Valkyries, robot henchmen, and of course, synth music. Following these guidelines won't guarantee that your movie or story will be good, but it will be a hell of a lot of fun for me personally. And really, isn't that what matters? This has been my extremely well thought out and objective analysis of science fantasy. If you appreciate my genius, please consider donating to my Patreon campaign, like these fine people. You can find me on social media despite my consistent attempts to disengage. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next episode.